So welcome everyone. My presentation is Community Narratives for Architecture Spaces, Christiansburg Institute. My goal for my thesis was to really understand and research the process as a designer and how I can be more involved with the community. And so for this process, I wanted to understand specifically the site of Christiansburg Institute. And so I chose this site because it was something very personal for me, as my grandparents attended this high school. And I really want to understand what that process as an architect and understanding ethnography can be the process. So architecture is a pathway to capture memories in the physical present. Similar to a charm bracelet, a path leads you through individual segments, each telling their own stories. Community Narratives for Architecture Spaces investigates how design strategies can be choreographed around the memories of the Christiansburg Institute, a historically African-American school and its cultural legacy. Materiality, lighting, and programming are used to articulate specific memories within spaces of this project. Maneuvering through the site, it is important to have moments that highlight the past, present, and future. There's a life cycle where things must come to an end and new opportunities can grow from them. This cycle can be beautiful, yet ugly to navigate through. Architecture highlights the essence of the cycle by portraying how the new can be born from the old. An old site can be transformed into a new one, creating new memories and perspectives while preserving existing ones. Christiansburg Institute encompasses all of these beliefs. This design proposal honors the life cycle of the Institute. So during my research, I took time with the Christiansburg Institute Foundation to really understand what the history was of the site, starting in 1865 and eventually closing down in 1965. It was primarily an African-American school, and it started by having just through a house where they were renting, which grew to a campus of 185 acres in a range of approximately 14 buildings at a time on the campus. And the purposes were always changing. One of the main founders was Booker T. Washington. And they also worked with the Quakers and the Schaefers in Philadelphia to really grow this institute for what we know it is as today. Additionally, it also had an African-American hospital, which unfortunately did burn down. But most of these sites I was able to investigate what was on the site, what was the purpose of the site, and how are these purposes changing over time. So during my research, I first want to look at how is the site used? And this was kind of a range of between carpentry, agriculture needs, different things that people could be doing, wheel writing, printing, and really understanding the usage of the school, but also understanding how it was founded. So the students on the site built these buildings. And they also took time to focus on it being first an agriculture school, but due to funding, they decided to open it more, increasing academics, which then transformed eventually over time to also doing things for like cosmetology, barbershops, and everything else, depending on what the needs were of each time. So during my research, I went through and looked at what was the actual site. And so I was able to pretty much conclude with these 4 maps how the site changed over time. First in 1912, looking at what the parcels were at that time in different buildings, then comparing it to 1921 with Sanborn's map. The black map is also showing another blueprint, which we approximate is in the 1940s or 50s based on what is on the site, but we do not know the exacts. And then looking at the current conditions of 2020. And as you can see right now, there's only 1 building left. So I took all of this information and I was able to then bring this into a digital ArcGIS story map. And so this will be published in approximately 2 weeks. And so I've been working with the foundation to go through. And as you would be able to go through this information, you could ideally pick a number. And on the right, it would be able to show you ideally a photo of what the site was. When was this building brought to the site? Was it torn down or is it still there? And then the history. So you'd be able to really understand the range of the site, because at one point it was 185 acres, but at this point there's only 5 acres left. And so this is a current photo of what it looked like in 1921. You're able to see old silos, a barn, different parts of the site, different school buildings that were able to be funded during the time. And so then I also took a comparison of seeing what the site looked like, ideally what it looked like when it was closing. So I was able to understand that there was a principal home, which also hosted a library. There was an old athletic field, which was also then later changed to do football, tennis, and other activities. The Scattergood building was their main gym, which is one of the most, I think, prized possessions of the students who were the last graduates. A teacher dormitory, trade building, home economics, a barn with a horses stall and an old shop. And then The current main buildings that people discuss now is the Bailey Morris Hall, the Edgar Long Building, which is still standing, the Crab Creek, and the pond. So to really understand how this site was developed and what this meant to the community, I took time to interview 4 of the alumni from the school. This included my grandmother, Jacqueline Smith, my grandfather, Jerry Wims, my great aunt, Georgia Hayden, and my great uncle, Ernest Hayden. Hearing about their experiences told me so much. It told me about what the memories were like, how the people still hang out now, what has it meant to the community, and how they would ideally want a legacy to be told. So if we'll take a minute or two just to hear a few clips about how they think Christiansburg Institute was and what the impact of that could really be. I like that before we continue on. And please let me know right now if you are unable to hear any noise.
There's a lot of room there for growth, what used to be. But now you have factories, daycare, and who knows what else down there.
Was there any part of Christiansburg Institute that symbolized community to you as a student? And how about now as you reflect on the space?
I would say the gymnasium, and mostly because it was a kind of like a gathering place. It's where you could meet your friends, and we didn't have a cafeteria, so you stood in the hallways where the lockers were and had your lunch. But it was a gathering place. It's where you got together with your friends and classmates. And well, we have a reunion every year. And if we had our own building, I think a lot of people would love that. As it is, we have to look for places to hold the venue, and it can get expensive, very expensive.
Yes, it's family. Because, I mean, you know, they're old friends, you know, you don't see for a long, long time. And then, you know, all the class reunions and things that they have that we've been to, you know, once you all come together, it's still like family.
You know, everybody comes from different areas, so we all work together to achieve a common goal, and that was to graduate.
And it brought forth a very, very good fellowship and also unity amongst all the students of each other. We felt close to each other. We bonded with each other. We expected to see each other. We would even have prayer with each other. And it was totally allowed, no exceptions at all. And it was a very free atmosphere for us to be able to do that with one another and be able to share the love with one another.
I think we have more feelings for it at the present time because we remember back then how it was. And I don't know, it just seemed like it's not like that anymore after was integration.
So those were just a few of the words that were given during my interviews. It really helped me think about how the feelings have continued to understand of Christiansburg Institute and how these people really care about the space. And even though it has been closed down, they still continue to try to meet with the alumni. They have monthly meets for lunch, they have reunions, and they really care on what the descendants and how their legacy is being shown. On this slide now that you can see is some of the last photos of some of the buildings before they were tore down. Seeing Bailey Morris Hall and seeing what it really stood out in the community. This is a very large campus at its time. An additional part of taking that research, I then went in and did a survey, understanding what people could want. I asked them would they like a museum, a trade school, a library, memorial, park, community center, or other. And additionally, most people were saying that they'd really like a community center or some form of park. And that was very interesting to me to see what people wanted in this site and how they would like to see people using this space currently. So I took in all the information from the interviews, all the information from the surveys, and really kind of broke it down into main categories between community space, a restaurant space, and educational space, and why they wanted these different centers for the site. Then I decided to look at materiality. Currently, we're looking at the Schaefer Memorial Baptist Church and the schoolhouse, which was the first 2 sites for Christiansburg Institute. They are still standing. And something that really was interesting to me was the materiality, understanding the white wood, the brick, the type of roofing that they had, the triangle structures, but also really looking at stained glass. The idea that they were putting in at some of the really important areas people's birthdays or memorials for these people that were really important to the site. And I wasn't able to figure out exactly who those people were. But the idea of documenting memories within space, but also using stained glass and the idea of beauty and nostalgic is something really quite great, especially since these were built in 1860. So I did my own study to really understand how that could be used with stained glass, and also could be used. I did a virtual study to see how the two photos on the right are the exact same location and how that can change the atmosphere or feeling if you're using stained glass or regular glass. So through all of my research this past year, I've put all this information together, and it's been a collage of craziness. There's been tons of materiality, different things that go together, understanding how people will walk through a space. I wanted to understand how can you capture memory through architecture. And I also really wanted to understand how these all can have these connection paths. Whether you're someone new to the site or someone old, you could find different interests. And that now leads me to my idea of Christiansburg Institute with my proposal. This is a visionary site, and this is what I would like to propose based on all of my research. And I would like to break you down through all the different parts of understanding the building components, the site components, and then I'll take you on your own tour through the campus. So first, this is the new site plan and section. Ideally, I had people coming into the site through the main road, being able to then see through some type of parking arrangement with the long building still standing. There'd be water pool features, there'd be areas for the main gym and additional other functions. But retaking back a lot of the space, no longer would there be just 5 acres, there'd be so much more. But also looking at really how the elevation of the site changed. So the first thing before I could really jump in, I had to look at what was the site in context. And so I first started looking at, I broke it down into residential areas, community centers, educational institutes, religious institutes, the Huckleberry Trail, and the existing Christiansburg Institute buildings. And so based on that knowledge of the site, I wanted to understand how can things stay connected. But I really felt like right now, the way the current site is, as it was mentioned in the interviews, it is mostly just abandoned factories or factories in other abandoned areas. And I really feel like this could be a really prosperous community hub that really brings in the community from religious institutions or residential, or right across the street when you're going to the pool. This should be a prime hub for everyone. And so then I decided to look at the site zones. And so the green shows agriculture, which could have gardens or also bring back the apple orchard. Then the pink or the light pink shows the existing CI buildings and where they were before they were demolished. And so I want to create those memorials in those spaces. Then the yellow shows the programs and functions that I've added based on the interviews. The darker deep maroonish purple is the existing CI buildings that are still standing. And then the purple is the rejuvenant pre-existing landscape buildings, which is the pond or where the old mill was before CI was built. And then also the idea, let's keep having the train station where it was, moving it slightly to the right, making that again another entrance into Christiansburg. And then I really want to highlight this idea of what I call the charm ribbon, which I will tackle more in this presentation. The next thing I wanted to look at is how would people circulate through space. So the dark purple shows how people could enter and then also exit the site. In addition, if you're on train, how could you enter into the site? Then I wanted to understand if I'm at the long building, what are the different views that I'm seeing looking upon the site? And then if I'm at the previous train station, which has now been expanded to the duck pond area, what are those views if you're looking back on to the north side of the site? So I broke down all that information and broke down into my main building, which now includes the darker areas, which are green, which are for my gardens. These are at places where areas of rest, areas of refuge. Some of these areas are specifically for areas that were to memorialize the space, but others are just for new. Then there are additional areas where I'm looking at how are people entering the space? Where is the main gym? What about the library in the back? And then what about the community center and the theater? These purple areas that you're seeing are where there'd be waterways of reflection. And on the second floor, I wanted to also include a mezzanine overlooking so that there's also a kind of goes out to the outdoor space because this is a 2-story structure. And then also an overlooking area for people who are watching basketball games or whatever events that are happening. And so my main thing when I was designing was how can you have flexible spaces, but also how can people be moving inside and outside of
I'm
the
here
space?
watching my granddaughter do a presentation at Virginia Tech.
Can you please mute? All things I'm have to have. Thank you. Um, and then also having some of the theaters with indoor outdoor spacing as well. So as we continue through this presentation, I want to wrap up with giving you a campus tour. And so I want to wrap it as if I'm taking the alumni on their first tour through the site as if it is today. The first place we're going to have is as if we're entering the site. We're going to immediately enter on Scattergood Drive. On the left, you'll see some of the existing old, what they're currently now creating the new museum, which was, I think, ideally a smokehouse at one point, and then an additional building, which hasn't quite been determined what the function was. On the right, there is a daycare. And then you'll see also on the right, you'll see a gym, which was the original Scattergood gym, but it's been right now redeveloped for different purposes. And you'll start to see this new greenery space that kind of encloses what CI could be. So as you're driving down, you'll immediately see, as soon as the trees break, the long building. You'll start to see partially this new building behind, and it's kind of really deep into the mountain, really understanding that you still get that view of what it is currently, but also this idea of growth happening. So it kind of gives you that sneak peek that wants to drive you around. Next, you're finally turning into the site. You're able to finally see some of the long building again on the left, but on the right, you'll start going through the apple orchard. And then you also see some of the first memorial spaces coming in. But in the far back, you'll still see that main big building that's kind of drawing your eye into the space. That kind of makes you want to see what's going on. And then finally, we'll first hit our first site. We'll start to park, and you're immediately going to see this huge building, which I call the gym. And this gym is going to be using different areas of stained glass and different features, using a walkway that walks right past where you can see people playing. On the right, there'll be that mezzanine walkout where you can go out to the yard and have certain functions. Meanwhile, you'll still see parents or family watching people play the game, and you still have that vista view that takes you all the way through to the end of the site that you can see through the gym. So depending on when you're coming up into the site, whether it's a game or a performance or whatever's happening in the community, this space can really function for different areas and different people. Next, we're going to go right back to where the long building is. At that location, you'd be able to see a bridge that draws you all the way down out to an overlook that where you can see the entire site. On the right, you'll see these slanted walls that almost appear as if it's one solid wall, but then you'll slightly realize that they're actually angled, so that there's different stained glasses that kind of give this glowing effect into the gym space. And then you'll see these beautiful little gardens that kind of cover up different areas that you see snippets of what the building is starting to give you into the space. Well, if you decide that you don't want to go down that ramp, you can always go down the side on the right. And you have that second option to get closer to those slanted angled glasses, while also seeing one of our first rest areas, the wall of memory. And while you're there, you'll be able to see certain things engraved as the waterfall is flowing. You'll hear that sound coming through. It's just a moment of reflection. But this is specifically one of the spaces where there was an existing building. And so I've specifically designed the areas where there was a specific physical building to be moments of reflection with either growths of water or plants. Next, we'd be able to continue to tour around maybe midday. You come towards the entry garden. We've explored the outside site. You see people actually in the garden mending. It's a community space. You see people walking through, but then you see this very drastic stained glass feature that kind of draws you in. And this is where I call the entry into the ribbon. The ribbon is specifically designed to take you to every building onto the site. It's like a time capsule, and it's going to connect you to all the different memories, whether it's stopping now or ideally could be enlarged to take you to more spaces as the site continues to grow. And if you happen to walk in, you'll see this grand staircase, the Gem of the Stone, that takes you straight up into the library zones. Or you can take down that entire ribbon that if you walk straight through, you'll see all the way out to the entrance on the other side. And this is below a section of that entire ribbon that takes you through all the different buildings. But if you decide that the first building that you want to hit is on your left, or if you want to take the outdoor path through, you'll immediately start to see the community center. There's an overlook coming out from the library where that you can then hang out in the community space. There's an opening wall that takes you out into the patio. And then you still have this framed view by the glass that sees the entire site. Next to that, you'll see the theater. That's a space where people can come, and it's an indoor and outdoor theater with a wall that can come down if you want to kind of divide those two spaces. But again, you can have that indoor area where you create that view. It's like having that Christmas show with actually seeing snowfall behind you. You can create any show you want. Meanwhile, there could be people performing outside. It's like having two community spaces in one, and understanding the flexibility of that space and how the function could change based on different needs. Next, you'll see people going through the patio, which also really highlights that ribbon. Again, as you can see, that really starts to pinpoint between each exterior space. You'll see people in the gym, and at some point you start to realize it's all coming together. We're all starting to kind of really unite and use these different spaces for different functions. Lastly, I'd probably want to take the alumni down to the garden. The garden is that space of refuge. This is where, again, one of those buildings, pre-existing buildings that were tore down, will be memorializing. So it'd be a garden space with a stained glass inside. Again, you can see the ribbon going through the space, but really understanding what it's like to take that moment to sit down, take that moment to reflect as we come towards the end of that zone. And as you're walking through that ribbon at different parts, you'll start to see those different areas with stained glass, areas with clear where you can see out into the site of what it is now, areas with memory, area that where people are holding different things, different artifacts. And it kind of shows you that with that path of life, how it continues to hold different memories for different people. We can enter different spaces, we choose our own path. But with CI, the cycle is to continue. It is to continue through different ideas of memory and understanding how that path changes as you continue to go. And as night falls, we'll conclude by wrapping ourselves going through the parkway and ending out. And you'll be able to look back onto the site as you look up and see the different areas being used as it's almost this glowing pyramid of the glowing mountains within Christiansburg. And so as you're walking through, whether it's nighttime or day, you feel safe, you feel like you're at home, and you feel like you're back with your community. Thank you. I'd like to open it up now for any committee for comments.
Good job.
Yay!
That's good. Good job, Renee.
Thank you.
Great job.
I appreciate it.
So nice to see it come together.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I completely agree. It's
would
really
you
a great
mind-
accomplishment.
While we're talking, and then maybe others will want to change the scene, but for you, the strongest point of the project, could you put that up on the screen?
Oh, you want me to pick my own strongest point?
Yeah.
Okay. Conceptually or physically? Two different.
Yeah, conceptually first.
Conceptually, I'd say it would be the ribbon, just because ideally that was a place of connection. And that to me symbolized the idea of what Christiansburg Institute stood for. The idea of connection from the beginning to the end, the idea of history, time capsules, the idea of opening up different gateways for different people. And I kind of thought about that of, based on the alumni I know, where are they now? And so they all took very different paths. And so hearing about their experiences and then hearing about what was important to them, and also hearing about the idea of space and them wanting to memorialize those things, I felt like it was all a journey, and it's like this life cycle. And I feel like what best represents that conceptually was the ribbon.
Good, good. Yeah, this is a great page, actually.
Thank you.
So do you, maybe others want to jump in, but one more question since we're here. Do you have the sense that the ribbon has the capacity to change over time, to have more things added in?
Definitely. And I think it's kind of better shown in, let me figure out some of the right plans. So as you can kind of see in this image, the ribbon doesn't stop where the building ends. So technically it's showing that it's going to keep continuing. You can just keep changing that path. And there's other areas where it opens up, you're technically not in an enclosed structure. So this idea of you could continue that way as well. You could just have a walkway that continues, but still have that main structure behind. Maybe you have a covering such as a roof, but it could be an outdoor walkway that takes you to other spaces, but keeping that really elongating the actual idea of the space. And then also where I think I used that bridge coming down, people could kind of play with that too, to almost change the location of the ribbon, but still keeping that same kind of look. So I think there's definitely a potential for growth depending on what was wanted on the space, or also just kind of changing those segments that are currently there and changing some of their functions.
That's good.
I would agree with you that the ribbon is it's a device right now that you impose on the site as a large ordering measure. And I think the repetitiveness and the growth potential that the ribbon has is, I think, a very successful instrument for you to bring a new order to the Christiansburg Institute. And I think that was a good choice. We had conversations before. There might be a sort of a question of the ribbon itself, how it is formulated, right? So I see the perhaps almost a little competition right now between this form, right, that goes all the way through, which I would consider almost the actual ribbon now, right? Or whether or not these kinds of enclosures that you have should be removed in order to strengthen the overall perception of the ribbon, and that what you call so eloquently right now. It's 14, right? I always get the number wrong. 14. And you attributed a significance to the number 14 also, which I think is it's a good thing to find. Whether or not what you eloquently described before is the connection between the individual ribbon elements, right? And you said it's important for you to have this kind of connecting part. Also, let's say, I forget exactly how you put it. It's the connection between those individual centers, and that is important to you because it's reflecting in the architecture what the community desires to do. Right?
Yeah.
And so there's kind of it's a small question, and I think it's not so super important. But there's a question of whether the hierarchy of the ribbon could be strengthened overall in its overall condition. And then subsequently, you already made some changes where what I would call the surrogate to the ribbon, right? Which are the buildings. The ribbon is the mother in a way, right? And it takes care of all the children. So there's this question about this dimension between that what attaches to the ribbon and how it attaches to the ribbon. So there's a question, might be a question of hierarchy. Should this roof be at the same level as the ribbon, right? Because it's in some ways, at least from my perception, I would rank it in differently in its behavior with the building that's attaching to the ribbon, right? So it's kind of clamping on to the ribbon, and the ribbon nourishes the ancillary building. So sometimes in architecture, you can respond to this kind of perception. Right? So if you extrude it into the same dimension, it loses a little bit of that power. So that would be my suggestion. If you have any potential for revision, right? That could be, or you could even write a short self-critique about that. But in general, I think that was a great decision. I think overall, as an organizing theme for the site to introduce that. That's very, very, very good success.
Thank you. Sorry, you continue, Sharon. I'll comment after.
Oh, I was just going to say that I wanted to jump in because I have the exact, I completely agree. I think that there was really a moment in the project, in the progress of the thesis, in which you devised the ribbon and the project really came and sort of clicked into place. And I think for you, it has a lot of symbolic resonance, which is really important for you as the designer, because it's what helps drive you and find meaning in the work. But I think that even if a visitor doesn't recognize any of those sort of symbols that you are calling on, that it still does really, really important work. And I think that there are a couple of things that it does that I want you to really recognize in it. I think one of them is as a linear device where it sits on the site is really useful. You know, it's really sitting, it's parallel to the contours on the site. We've talked about so much how the site is sloped and how that sloping of the site is so significant and is such a crucial aspect of the architecture that you're trying to create. So I think a ribbon was a really smart device to situate along that. But I think the other thing it does, it's really powerful, is it enables you to connect all these different programmatic functions, all the different things that the Institute today wants so they can continue to function in the future. You know, there's the Institute as it had been in the past, and so much of its work today is to try to remember and bring back to life that memory of the past. But I think what's really significant is the Institute sees itself, you know, I would argue completely rightfully, as something that needs to go forward into the future. And so there's a lot of different activities that need to be housed architecturally in order to do that. And the ribbon really lets you do that. You know, it's very different than a building that's sort of a big cluster and you're sort of trying to jam all the different programmatic bits into that. I think to kind of give them all the space to sort of be free and kind of do their own thing, and to each sort of independently interact with the movement across the site and with the site itself is a really important feature. And I think that's what makes it really successful. So good job.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Sharona, on that note. I agree with my colleagues here, you know, really thinking about how you're situating that ribbon as a device, right? I'm curious to know, or just to say thank you, because for me, I just started to really see the temporal dimensions of the ribbon as you started to talk about your project today, and how it pays homage to the past, what's happening in the present, and then what could be projected, as Sharon is saying, for the future of Christiansburg Institute. And there's something that also relates to that with how you articulate spaces, indoor and outdoor, and the relationships to those, that I think when you do your write-up, right, that you're gonna have to like dig in and actually capture that, because it's such an important piece of your project. So I just want to make sure that you get that as well. The temporal dimension of what you propose here is really, really significant. It's really important. And the story of CI from the past, where it is now, and where CI wants to go in the future, right? And how those spaces can actually help carry out that vision.
Thank you.
Arnie, I also have to compliment you. I think in many of the images, you changed them from sort of the brutal output that the computer sometimes gives in a rendering to an image that lets me dream.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, right? So if the image is over rendered, right, you have your thoughts cannot escape it anymore. But I think you reduced this kind of artificial precision to an element where actually I can dream about it. And I think, see, this is very important for an architect. We want to put dreams in people's heads, and sometimes the dream gets realized. And you know, it's definitely a skill for an architect to have. And I think you did a good job in many of the images. One other thing. Can you go back to maybe one of the first photographs in the presentation?
Yep. One of the ones I did, or one of the actual photographs of the history?
It was pretty much at the beginning of the presentation. It was I'm looking for the elevations of the buildings on the outside. There's a photograph. Or a photograph.
I think it's slide 11.
Yeah, that's.
This is.
Go to 11. 11 had the composition.
11. That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
it's right. See, I think you did something maybe unconsciously, but it's definitely there. And I'm referring particularly to this form that is here, that is always recognizable, and especially here, right?
Mm-hmm.
See, the ribbon kind of brings this memory of formerly back, right? And I think that is actually, you know, in terms of intelligibility, the recognizing of something that is formally connected to the past, I think was a good move.
Thank you. I didn't include it in this series, but there was definitely an investigation where I took time to broke each building down to like the basic forms and shapes, which helped really influence me. in addition to when I was doing the materials, I don't think I mentioned it to the group, but I know I've mentioned to you all, like the idea of using marble for all the entrances, because at that point that's what they were using, which is very astonishing for the time period that they were able to use those things. So I really try to understand the purpose of some of these materials, why they use certain shapes, whether that's just like the traditional form at that time, and how can that be used in, I guess, a more modern element, and also still be playful.
Yeah, to me, I mean, I'm thinking here, right? and here's Byrony,
The
right?
ribbon. Yep.
I think it was a good move.
Thank you so much.
I think, Irony, one thing that's really strong about the thesis, of course, your objective now is to make the next steps and to completely wrap it up. So it's not the time perhaps for what I'm going to talk about, but I think for those who may be in the audience who are students, or those who are in the audience that would be part of other building projects, I think it's consequential how you have woven all the content together. And I think it's worth, I think you have to be away from it for a while, and that you could almost produce that as an artifact that you would share with others as a piece of scholarship of how these things, because in some cases, okay, it's your choice. You chose the metaphor for this thing, but it didn't come 100% out of you. You wanted something that had the capacity. I mean, it did come out of you, but it came out of the situation. It came out of the site. You didn't ignore those things. It came out of the people who had a history that they could remember. It came out of the documents. It came out of the land. As luck would have it, I didn't have time to read it this morning, but Christiansburg High School wants to double, it sounds like double the size of their building up there.
I could see that.
It would be a good time to touch them some way. But I think this other thing would be important to have in hand, so at least they could be aware of potentials they're stepping over. Because sometimes the function is such a strong driver that it's just stomps very heavily on everything else. And I think your initial metaphor of the ribbon as a charm bracelet is so important, that it has this capacity to be continuous and yet particular at every point. And not here, but such a project, that would be a wonderful project to take this project from where it is and really develop those moments. You know, it's an exhibition, certainly, but an exhibition, it sounds to me like you hope it has the capacity, and others have mentioned, to evolve even in the charms on the bracelet.
I agree. I think one as a project, but also just in context of reality. My idea is I'm going to repeat this presentation for anyone who is interested with the Christiansburg Institute Foundation in a couple months. And it's the idea that, no, this isn't maybe to someone's budget, or this may not be everyone's exact. I'm not trying to kick all these factories off the land per se, but just to have the community talking. I think some of these points have gotten lost. And when they are really thinking about redesigning that community, what are the potential spots for the area? And also when you're thinking about what is Christiansburg Institute, what does that mean now? Because even I know from someone who's from the community, hearing my grandmother talk about it growing up, she'd say, oh, this was a school I went to. And I was like, cool, it's an abandoned building. I didn't understand. And honestly, I didn't care, you know, I was a teenager. So now looking back at it and now understanding the history, I think right now it's just a lack of knowledge for some of the people who would care. And just being like, okay, if we're going to design this community, let's design it right. There's so much potential. There is land. There's so much more places you could put a factory that's not really considered a community hub. But just sparking those conversations, and then maybe ideally somebody could see it who could make that change. So for that next 10-year plan, who knows what this site could look like, but maybe it's hopefully going towards the way that we want it to be.
Well, and I think that what's so important that the project provides is an imagination. I think it's really, really important to articulate an imagination of what it could be. And I think you're absolutely right that the budget, this may not meet certainly what the Christiansburg Institute's current budget
Highly
is.
expensive.
But I think that the imagination is incredibly important, whether that gets sort of put forward actually in a really pragmatic way that you can actually raise money when you have a vision, but also to sort of, can sort of produce and generate new ideas for what the site could be, to kind of imagine different realities. Do we need to have abandoned factories on this site? That may not be a question that anyone had considered beforehand. I wanted to add another comment that's a little different, not disagreeing, but just another point, which is that I think it's amazing to see this presentation and remember where you were a year ago, or even 9 months or 6 months ago. This is a huge, huge project that you've undertaken with this, and it took a lot of work and effort to sort of get your arms around it and to really develop a method for thinking about the site as a whole, in a really productive way, to sort of find a way to give an architectural and spatial form to all of your ideas about sort of remembering the past of the Institute. And I think it'll be really useful and productive for you to go back and reflect on that process as you go forward in these next 2 weeks in the last stage. To sort of kind of think back and almost kind of do kind of almost biography of the process, so that you can record that and really come to terms with and recognize what were those critical sort of moments and realizations in the process. So not necessarily a history of the process, but those kind of key moments and key sort of awakenings that you had, in which you realized methods for putting this all together as one big coherent design.
Definitely, I'll definitely want to include that. There's a lot of discovery just about the site, also about technique. This is the biggest project I think I've ever tackled. I had a thesis in undergrad and I might have did maybe 1,000 square feet. And so looking at this, I'm like, oh, it's an entire site plan. And what does that mean when you have to also think about the community's opinions? What does it mean when you have to also think about different functions and how can they all intercept with this different type of architecture? And there were so many questions I had to really think about. And I think everyone says, let's ask the community, but it's also different asking people who aren't architects. So sometimes you might ask them a question of describe the site and they might say, oh, it was a fun place to be. But I'm thinking, tell me about the brick. Tell me about the size of the land. So just how to ask questions, what to ask, and how can you really preserve those memories? How can you give them a voice? I think that's something that's become very important to me, and learning this process, I think it's something that's going to continue to evolve, but it's definitely sparked something that I'm very excited to continue.
That's great. Sharon, I really like that comment about identifying key moments. And I think that's why I really like page 16. If you go back to that, it pulls together on one page just a whole variety of ways you studied an idea or ideas that you studied. I mean, you looked at it in section, you looked at it in axonometric, in perspective, in plan. You looked at it in a zoomed out scale and in a zoomed in scale. So I really, we're always trying to get students to investigate ideas in a variety of ways like that. So I just really appreciate that page.
Thank you.
Barney, could you find a site plan?
Yep.
I wanted to append a couple of comments to what CL and Sharon said. Could you zoom in into the sort of building part?
Yep.
See, in terms of creating a vision, I think, some of the images do that. And so here is the strength of the ribbon to me.
Mhm.
The ribbon does not have to be built all at once, but it can be established at once. By that, I mean, whether or not it's only a footprint in the landscape for now, or just a simple scaffolding that generates formally the outline of the ribbon. It is not so important, I think, but it could be established with very little money. And see, the other thing that's interesting, the gym certainly will cost some money, right? But see, the ribbon could also host as a surrogate just a simple sports field. And the gym could be built later, right? See, this is the strength of the ribbon, that the surrogates, they can come over time if the ribbon is established in some form. And it can be sort of, how should I say, strengthened over time, as an architectural artifact. But I think the device itself has great potential, especially in terms of incremental growth to the left and to the right. So just be confident. I think that was a good choice.
Thank you.
Yeah, it might, you have 2 weeks and you are going to be busy.
Very.
Likely. But it could be, a diagram can come at any time. Or it can come in the beginning, it can come in the middle, you can have all kinds. And just what Heiner was talking about, you could have a somewhat hard line, let me say that, diagram, because the dimensions right now, the cadence is known to you. More or less it works, but you could doodle a little with this and make not one diagram, and I think it would happen very quickly. It could, once you get loose, a set of them that would explore only in line, not in this is the theater, but just what Heiner's talking about. And one way is to think about it as being a reverse ruin, that you imagine this place, if it, that's a question architects have asked from time to time. Would your project make a beautiful ruin? No. So a reverse ruin, but not to be too particular, to just, in a sense, enjoy what this order could produce over time. And if you had, now don't fall over, if you had 10 of those, I think it would only take an hour. Maybe I'm being, but you have this material, is there anything else to get out of it now? I think to do the biography, Sharon says maybe that's later. The thing that I suggested early on is later. But this one could be within the next 2 weeks. And it would be you playing, just setting up the question. Because I think if we look around, we can be happy, for instance, that the town of Blacksburg has designated, if you take these things as two methods or modes, has designated some bike paths. And their routes are a little bit cranky, because where you can go is a little, it's this piecemeal piece and this piece. And you can see on the part of the town that they did a few things at some of the intersections. They sold bricks with the names of people or events as little memorials. They're very, not so inexpensive, but they're inexpensive, and made these intersections. But you can see also that there's an imagination that takes that effort to a certain point. But it's maybe a little too much satisfaction that you get the bicycle path through there at all, or walking path through there at all. So you just go, I'm done. Instead of, because this would be a part of such a project as you're approaching, if parts happened over time, yes, you can have conditional parts and they can be replaced, but you can also have substantial parts. And they might stay. They could stay as the first artifact. You know, it's when you look around, you start to see things that the other one that I would mention is not exactly as a function, but it's the 16 frogs marking the water of Blacksburg. I mean, there's no question. Those frogs are really good. They can stand in for real frogs. Not. I mean, they're bronze, but they can stand in for. They're a pretty good stand-in. I think they're really intelligent. There was the artist was chosen for her capabilities, certainly, but their poses, everything, they likely will not disappear. They will be a part of something else that goes on. I mean, one in our neighborhood was stolen. Boom, another one showed up on a base that is more substantial. So it's kind of an exciting capability if you can show that capability to the world about how something progresses, even from this point, a strategy or a sense that it can progress in parts. And you can invest in those parts because those frogs cost some money. There was a community donation taken up about them, but they are not inexpensive frogs, but they're a small thing.
Yeah, I think that'd be really nice just to have like a token of memory, and just seeing what that could be, the possibilities, and having people involved with that process. I think at that point it also makes it personal for everyone in the community, because it's like I was a part of that, whether I helped fund it or help the decisions, help choose the artist, because whether, whatever it's stating, whatever that memory is, you might not have a connection to that, but you might have more of a connection to that process now, and that makes you want to defend it. And so I think having these little tokens, ideally, if I could expand this, I'd want it to also make landmarks where all of the actual sites are off. So like over in Town Tree Homes, wherever it's called, there is right now a grave that should be marked. Right now it's in someone's backyard, but what happens when the man who owns that one townhome passes away? Who owns that? And then there was where the silos were. That was just on top of the hill. Was that where or not, like the Christiansburg High School was? So it's just kind of like there's so much opportunity. And I think giving that idea of playfulness, but also a really like sacred memorial, like it doesn't have to be a huge pond for each space. And that's something I think I really battled with. I was like, I want something to show the entire building, but sometimes it can be just as small and as important, whether that's a little waterfall area or just some planting area of a small garden or just a plaque. But just saying that there was something here. And I'd love to have those little connections all throughout, and then just create more walking paths that are safe. People could walk all the time, and then that just connects you more to the community in different areas. So whether you don't care about the memory, you just want a place to walk, you still win.
I have to smile because I hear Donna talking, and I'm thinking now the ribbon should be started with 14 giant frogs.
That'll be the next plan. See me on Thesis too. How CI became frogs.
But it's good. Do you hear what she's saying? The ribbon or other markers can be established. Sometimes it doesn't take that much to actually get something into existence. Right? That you think about that. And I think that's really the strength of the proposal. And one more remark, your interview process and what you extracted from that is really very, very good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that's one of my favorite parts of the entire process. I think that's something I actually want to continue. If there's a way, whatever I'm doing in the future, I think interviewing people at the beginning and allowing them come with control of it. There's a bit of, I think sometimes we start with the design, but we haven't even talked to people yet.
Right.
And that's kind of the concern. So when you start asking those questions, it completely reshaped. I would have never done this shape of a building. At first, I had a whole different idea of some of my drawings, and I was like, I'm going to do a pathway, and that's going to be it. And it's going to be one solid building. And the functionality, there was no programs. It was just memorial space. And after talking to them and then really thinking about what does the community need as a whole, who are these people that I'm asking for? Why am I doing this? It completely changed the entire project. So I don't know if you have any more questions before I open up to public for anything. I don't know if there's much people still on, but I did want to give them a quick chance before wrapping up. Okay. Is there any public comments from any of the audience?
Very proud of you.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Amazing work.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate seeing this milestone take place live. Seeing your growth over the years, it's amazing. And I appreciate you, and I can't wait to see what you do in the future.
Good job.
Thank you. Glad to wrap it up. It's been a great process. It's been a great experience. I'm very happy for it. And so definitely ready to wrap up the book and start publishing some of the work. And I look forward to things I've learned now to ideally being used more for the process with the actual foundation when I redo this actual presentation, which I already know it'll be very different because it's going to be more community focused, or the audience will be very different, but I'm excited to see how even that process changes for me. So I look forward to sharing information. If anyone wants to continue to be connected with this information, just let me know, and I'll continue to keep sharing. And the book should be, I think, become public in the next couple of weeks. And at that point, everything else will be published for public access.
Great job.
That's a good job. Good job, Irene. Very, I think it's the kind of thing, I'm going to make this request, but I need to give you your own time for a little bit. I'll make the request, but you can declare the time, or if you even care to. But I think to share this with the first year group that I have would be very nice for them to see this, to hear you talk about it, and likewise the fifth year students. I think you're to be commended for taking this on. It's a significant achievement. And that's why sharing it is as important as making it. And I think this last piece that Sharon said, and some of us others made mention of the things to do next, they're important as well.
Thank you. I'll definitely be keeping in touch throughout the next week. I do want to make a quick comment because I saw some people who joined in the last 15 minutes. I'll be staying on for the next hour. So for after people start, falling off, any questions or repeating of any parts of the presentation, I'm more than happy to continue for people who've joined a little bit later in. Sorry to cut off.
I wanted to add one other thing. I really want to commend you for sticking with it for so long. This has been sort of an extra long thesis process for you, but I think that dedication and kind of continuing to work through something, no matter how long it takes, until it gets to a point in which you're satisfied with it, is it's incredibly important. And I can say, having worked in a professional context, incredibly important skill, an ethic to have. So
Time was a challenge, but also I think it was needed. If I ever repeated the process, I think typically for our thesis projects, we put a year for just the design. We give that time, or at least, at least 7 months and so much for research. But if you're going to have interviews, that's an additional process time you need. And if you want to do it correctly, and then taking time to do that research, because that might change it. So I think even though it's a little elongated, it's made it worth it. But thank you guys. Thank you for the committee for being so supportive. Thank you for giving up good parts of your summer to help me. I really appreciate all the work you guys have helped me get through, all the questions I've asked, all the last minute Zoom sessions. It was great to finally meet you all in person this month. It's been great working with you this past year. I think with all of your different expertise, it's really had me thinking about such different ideas and really projected this project. And I just want to say thank you.
You're really welcome, Byron A. I think that's why it would be so great to share this, to share, not only your project, but kind of your insight into your own project and your reflection of happiness with this as a possibility. The happiness about the engagement.
I'd be happy to. Just let me know. I'd be happy to share.
That would be great. We could have a little session for all our students.
Yeah.
I was like, thank you. I was like, yeah, I'd be happy to jump on. So yeah, I was like, if there's any other questions, I'll be here. I'll conclude and allow everyone to continue with their day, but I'll definitely be staying on. So whether there's any professors or anyone else in the audience who wants to stay on and talk to me, but if not, I'll conclude this presentation as a success and say thank you to everyone who supported me in this process. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Byron A.
Congratulations.
Great job,
Very,
Byron.
very, very well deserved.
Congratulations.
Now we will be sent a card or something.
Of course.
I think I think Donna, you have to do something now.
Byron, you can send a card. The graduate school doesn't send cards anymore.
She has to send it. Okay. I'll look for the next
No,
step.
we'll send a postcard.
No, but I think that Donna has to send in the next administratively, the next thing.
Donna needs to just sign off on the graduate school website.
Okay.
And then it'll cue all the rest of us to
Right.
sign.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Very good. Very
Okay.
good. Okay. Take care.
Congratulations again.
Bye.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Enjoy the day. Bye,
Bye.
Renee.
Thank you.
Bye.